Hello and welcome to our webinar, hosted by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's Community Development Studies and Education Department. Our discussion today, the intersection of education and employment, strengthening youth employment programs. I'm Jean Rourke from the Federal Reserve, and I'll be your facilitator. And let me be the first to introduce and thank our presenters for today's call. They are Keith Rowland, Michelle Henry, Keisha Bird, and Farah Farnese. And if you've joined us in the webinar, you'll see us jump to slide 2 to cover a few call logistics before we dive into our content. You may have noticed that the webinar tool offered the option to listen to the audio through your PC speakers or over the phone. Now, the quality of your PC audio does depend on your connection, so at any time, feel free to dial into the bridge number. And if you'd like to see the slides a bit larger, you can click on the small gray box at the top right of the slide window. This will maximize the slide for you. Okay, this call is being recorded, and the archive will be available in the next few days. It will be posted to the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's Community Development Studies page. You can also ask questions after our speakers present their content, but at any time during the session, you can type your questions into the chat window using the Ask Question button on your screen. And we'll move to slide 3 for some legal information. The views expressed here are those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. And with that said, I'll advance to slide 4, and I'll turn it over to Keith Rowland.
Thank you, Jean. The Philadelphia Fed's Community Development Studies and Education Department promotes community development and access to credit in low and moderate income communities. Our department has a focus on workforce development needs and opportunities for young people between the ages of 16 and 24. We're involved through events, webinars, research, and publications. Summer job and year-round employment programs are important for many reasons. They increase young people's awareness of the world of work and expectations in the workplace. They can also impart soft skills such as teamwork and communications, as well as financial capability skills. Today, we'll discuss opportunities to strengthen infrastructure and connections among programs, deepen private sector engagement, and bring a skills focus to summer youth employment. It's my pleasure to introduce our 3 speakers. Michelle Henry, Vice President of Global Philanthropy at J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, manages New Skills at Work. This is a $250 million 5-year workforce readiness initiative that seeks to address the skills gap that exists in many industries where there are not enough trained workers with the specific skills required for available jobs. Before joining J.P. Morgan Chase, she was Vice President for Workforce Services at Maximus, a global government services contractor. Speaking next will be Keisha Bird, Director of Youth Policy at the Center for Law and Social Policy, often referred to as CLASS, and Project Director for the Campaign for Youth. She works to expand access to education, employment, and support services for disconnected and other vulnerable youth. Before joining CLASS, she was Project Director for the Pennsylvania statewide after-school youth development network, in which she was working to make high-quality after-school programs accessible to young people. Farah Farnese is Director of Partnerships for Employment Pathways at the Philadelphia Youth Network, an intermediary that coordinates large-scale multi-sector initiatives. The network develops targeted programs to expand access to services for underserved youth. Her responsibilities include overseeing program design and implementation of summer internship programs. Michelle, welcome, and we look forward to your remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. We really appreciate the opportunity to partner with the Federal Reserve Bank in this convening this afternoon to share more about our work in this space. I want to say thank you also to all the folks who joined in this afternoon. I think it's going to be a rich discussion about a very timely issue. I was commenting to my fellow panelists that when we first started talking about this in January, in the dead of winter, it didn't really seem like it was timely to talk about summer youth, but it very much was in terms of planning and thinking about the work. So this afternoon, I'm going to present some key findings from a report that JPMorgan Chase released actually in January of 2014. The report is on our website, and we'll show you a link to that at the end of the presentation. And then it's also going to be on the Federal Reserve site if folks would like to take a look at it. The report's a qualitative analysis of 16 of the summer youth employment programs in 14 cities that JPMorgan Chase funded in 2014, and they really represent a cross-section of different models. Slide 11, please. So last summer, JPMorgan Chase made a 2-year, $5 million commitment to support employment opportunities for youth, including opportunity youth. So those young people ages 16 to 24 years old who are neither in school nor working. We really emphasized organizations who were focused on skill-building components and efforts to help young people get on a career pathway to help them create strong foundations for successful careers in the future. This commitment builds on New Skills at Work, which Keith just recently mentioned, an initiative that was launched in December of 2013. It's 5 years, $250 million investment in a global workforce readiness initiative that looks at some of the friction in the labor market, which results in this kind of disconnect between skills that job seekers have and skills that employers say that they need. And what this means is that jobs go unfilled every day, yet unemployment still persists. And so part of our investment in New Skills was seeking to help address unemployment and create greater economic opportunity. And we've done that sort of broadly from a global perspective, but also really honing in on how this challenge impacts young people. So last summer, through our investment, we helped our grantees to create almost 50,000 jobs across the 14 cities, about 54,000 learning opportunities for young people, all of whom were from low-income families aged 13 to 24 years old, and over half of them were aged 16 to 18. Now, as a large financial services institution, we also want to teach young people to save and to develop good financial habits, including setting up direct deposit and creating savings goals. And so in addition to funding, our employees also volunteer their time to provide financial capability coaching sessions and introductory coding skills to participating youth in some of our funded programs. Slide 12, please. So here's a list of all of the organizations that we funded in 2014. Our 2015 list is still in development as we finalize some of our grant commitments. In developing the last report, we provided both a national and a local perspective on both youth employment challenges and opportunities. And the report draws from an array of national data that was gathered by our partner, CLASP, and Keisha Bird from CLASP was also participating in the webinar. But we think what sort of gave the report kind of a lot of heft was the rich data that we gathered from our grantee partners, and we did that through the use of, in part, a survey. The grantees ranged from United Ways to community-based organizations, workforce agencies, and local foundations, a real mix of groups, many of which were operated as part of a collaborative effort supported by the mayor in each city. In the surveys, we asked about the types of partnerships they had developed, their program design and operations, their strategies for building a better employer engagement, and also the extent to which they were integrating sort of other services into their summer youth programs, including financial literacy and financial capability. And then finally, we conducted some individual interviews with program directors and a few focus groups with youth who had participated in the program and some employers. So I just wanted to give you a sense of kind of the methodology that we used. You know, interestingly, two key priorities kept coming up in the survey responses. One was the need to increase private sector engagement, right? No surprise there, and this real interest in really expanding skills-based learning opportunities. Next slide, please. So I mentioned, sourcing national data to inform the report. And really what the national data shows essentially is that there's a crisis. And I think you all know these facts even better than we do, that overall there are fewer job opportunities for youth. In fact, employment for teenagers has steadily declined over the last 10 years, deteriorating to a much greater degree than for any other age group. The number of youth who are applying for jobs far exceeds the number of jobs that are available to them. And so they're unable to gain that early work experience. And one of the things that, we're seeing, so through New Skills at Work, in addition to grants, we're also producing what we call skills gap reports in a number of markets. And what that research is showing is that in the fastest growing sectors, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, IT, for example, where the highest concentration of middle skills jobs are, employers are really requiring workers to have greater skills, right? And so this further underscores the challenge when young people aren't able to gain meaningful work experience and begin to build those valuable work skills, as they're unable to really compete in the adult workforce. This is at the same time when older workers are sometimes pushed into jobs that young people once held. So this really limits a young person's future employability, their earning potential, their ability to obtain training from their employers. And then there's also a negative impact just sort of on the broader economy when you factor in that individuals and businesses are losing revenue earnings and the increased costs of social services as young people transition into adulthood and become sort of further disconnected from the workforce. The data also reveal that there are disparities in employment by race, with white, non-Hispanic teens more likely to be employed than teens in any other race or ethnic group, as well as by income, with teens from a family earning less than $20,000, nearly 20 percentage points less likely to be employed than teens from higher income families. Next slide, please. So, we really think that summer and really year-round employment programs are critical for the estimated 6.7 million young people ages 16 to 24 who are unattached to school or work, and about half of whom are from low-income families or communities. These jobs create a financial boost for the youth and their families. In fact, one study shows that for every year young people work during their teens, their income during their 20s rises 14 to 16%, really significant. Summer jobs also provide an opportunity for career exploration and exploration of a young person's interests. They support increased retention and high school graduation. And summer jobs are really critical for gaining skills and exposure to professional cultures and sources of references. And just as sort of the challenges aren't limited, if you will, to young people, the benefits are not limited to young people either. I mean, employers benefit from the creation of a much better trained, a more diverse workforce pipeline. And what we've heard from many of the employers that participate in summer youth employment programs is that their full-time employees actually also benefit from the perspective and the energy that young people are bringing into their workplaces. Next slide, please. And so even though, there are not enough resources for programming, right, there's never enough funding for enough slots, either because cities have got reduced budgets, organizations are being asked to do more with less, program administrators continue to think about resource-efficient strategies to support the outcomes that they hope to achieve. And when we asked our grantees about some of the sort of common program elements and approaches that they found to be most effective, they cited the four that are listed here. So the first is providing coaching and other supports from caring adult mentors who can help a young person to develop goals, monitor them, and really support their efforts to complete their goals. And Kentuckiana Works is an example of such a program where the young people are given sort of significant performance on their, significant feedback on their work performance, and really have an opportunity to engage with the employers on site. The second is developing pathway approaches to career development, opportunities that offer entry and exit points along a continuum of both educational and employment activities and services, and also opportunities that integrate earn and learn strategies, so those that couple academic skill building with work experience. A third approach is providing training and enrichment opportunities for youth while they're working and linking those to their work experience. And Chicago presents a really good example. They use what they call badges that recognize and document a young person's performance and their accomplishments and skills. Jersey City is also another example where they've got sort of a customized curriculum for integrating professional development into the activities that the young person is performing at work. And then lastly, providing opportunities for leadership development and civic responsibility. And so creating those experiences that expose young people to new environments, that engage them in civic projects, allow them to volunteer, and provide them with opportunities to lead and function as a team, those all contribute to the development of important skill sets. Next slide, please. So we end the report by offering some opportunities for taking summer youth employment a step further. Nothing really new or novel. In fact, these ideas, if you will, are very much aligned with and reinforce what we hear from local officials and, program leaders and others in this space. And so first, we see a real need to strengthen the infrastructure, the quality, and the sustainability of summer youth programs. And we might do that by connecting them to plans for local workforce systems and economic development. And so the creation of this infrastructure might include something like developing a national framework and a playbook for cities that lays out best practices, and with standards of practice for issues such as skills development and curriculum guides, and more information about badges. Next, it would be helpful to create a better link between summer youth employment and skills gap policy and programs, including using a much more demand-driven approach to youth employment. This would not only better prepare young people to compete in the workforce, but it would enable the programs to tap into additional funding streams. So through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, states and local governments will have greater opportunity to implement some of these components, some components of this approach. And Keisha will talk a little bit more about that in her presentation. Lastly, deepening private sector engagement, really key. Private sector employers must be more engaged with partners and local officials to support summer youth programs, again, aligned with local workforce needs, not just as sort of a feel-good thing to do. And not just in terms of funding slots and hiring, although that's clearly needed, and we would never suggest that employers not offer opportunities to hire youth, but also things like sharing information about jobs that they have available and being really, really clear on the skills that are needed for the available jobs, both those technical skills and then, what we call soft skills or developmental skills. They can contribute to training programs. They can recruit mentors and really bring other employers within their sector or their space on board to support strong summer youth employment efforts. Next slide, please. So thank you again for your time this afternoon. Again, our report can be found on the JP Morgan Chase website, which is listed here. This will take you to sort of the home page for all of our workforce readiness initiatives, and you can access the report here. Again, the report will also be on the website of the Federal Reserve along with a copy of the presentation. So I'll now go ahead and turn it over to Keisha Bird from CLASP.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia for hosting this session on a very important topic today. And so my comments are really going to focus on building on what Michelle talked about, some of the needs, but really some of the solutions that we found through our work at CLASP, working with our communities of practice around the country, as well as some federal levers that are currently in play right now. So next slide. CLASP, a little bit about us. We seek to improve the lives of low-income people. We develop and advocate for federal, state, and local policies to strengthen families and to create pathways to education and work. And our youth policy work over the last decade plus has really been aimed to advance policy and practice that will improve education, employment, and overall life outcomes for youth that are living in communities of high youth distress. And so next slide. Michelle talked a little bit about the youth unemployment crisis already, but what we know is that the proportion of teens and young adults who are able to find jobs has steadily declined since the 1980s. We know that's a function, one, of some public disinvestment that has happened, as well as the changing labor market, and couple that with the Great Recession. We know youth are experiencing higher unemployment rates than other adults, and these figures are from 2012 averages. So overall, there's a 20% teen unemployment rate, and we know that for different racial and ethnic groups, that jumps, and it jumps really drastically for black youth to 33%, and especially for young black men to 37% teen unemployment. And again, as Michelle mentioned, too many of our young people are not attached to school and work, and this gives us a framing for how we want to tackle some of the solutions that exist. So next slide. One thing we know, again, is that through various demonstration projects that have happened through the 90s, including the Youth Opportunity Grant Program and others, is that solutions do exist. And CLASP has been working with about 17 communities from around the country for a little over 10 years, really as a feedback loop to inform our federal policy recommendations, but also to document and lift up best practice and challenges and solutions. And next slide, what we found in studying and working with our communities is that to have a comprehensive youth employment delivery system, there are certain elements that really need to exist. And we feel that summer youth employment should be nested as a part of an overall vision or structure. And so the first thing we found in our communities of practice is that you need a strong convening entity. And that convening entity is really responsible to amass the various stakeholders, business, education, K-12, higher education, youth themselves, providers, elected officials, all really to shape a community vision, to maximize resource sharing, and really to hold each other accountable for that broader vision, and including how we're moving towards improved outcomes. Second, an effective administrative agent, and we'll hear a little bit later in the session from Philadelphia Youth Network who does function and play some of these roles in that particular city. And that administrative agent's role really is to work in partnership with all of these systems, hold regular meetings, providers, and ensuring the quality of programming as well as the vision of the entity is effectively implemented. You need a well-trained case management arm. When we're talking about low-income young people and young people who live in high-poverty communities, we're talking about young people face multiple issues. And so a case management arm is really responsible for that navigation and support, engaging youth in identifying and meeting their needs, not just their weaknesses and deficits, but also their strengths. And we have to remember that we need to come at this with a strengths-based perspective. Also, really identifying what are the appropriate wraparound supports that a young person may need, whether it's health, mental health support, if they are parenting, what is needed in terms of child care, and what other systems do they need to interface with, especially as we talk about older youth and young adults in that 16 to 24 age range. And we also really need to think about strong partnerships, and we found that many of the communities we work with have strong partnerships across systems that serve youth. And those are partnerships with K-12 education, which, you know, there may be a lot of challenges, but it's a very important partnership to have. And juvenile justice, child welfare systems, so that you can be able to share resources and provide additional support to very vulnerable youth. And increasingly, we've been seeing in local areas such as Hartford and Kansas City, Missouri, that partnerships with the TANF system is very important. There's an increasing number of young people under 25 who are heads of households and are actually, raising children. So it's important to consider that as well. And then, again, as this is one of the focuses of today's session, but really high-quality work experience and career exposure components. One, they provide hands-on exposure to the workplace. They instill appropriate work behaviors and ethics. And they really allow for the exploration of various occupations and career options progressively as young people gain skills over time. And that's a very important function that can happen in summer youth employment, is that as young people attain more experiences over the summer, they progress into increased responsibilities. Next slide, please. And so this graphic really is a way for, communities and systems to think about their work, not just on the programmatic side, but also on the system building side. And so those two sides really fit together. You can't have strong programs without the strong system, and you can have a strong system and a collaborative efforts, but without strong programs, and this is what we mean by quality, then you won't have a comprehensive youth employment system. So things we already know and research has supported. You need caring adult support. You ask any young person, what is the single most important feature of your youth development or youth employment, summer youth employment experience, they'll say a mentor, an advocate, caring adult. Including multiple pathways, Michelle touched on this, that really thinks about academic and occupational preparation, as well as coupling that with the rich work experience. And then opportunities for young people to personally develop leadership, civic engagement, so that they can really realize their own self-worth and that they are contributing members of their own communities. And again, I already mentioned connections to systems and important resources. Next slide. So now I just want to focus my last several comments really on how do we take an advantage of an opportunity that is of a piece of legislation that has passed last summer but is in the process of being implemented right now, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And it offers important levers that can help to spur more skills-based summer youth employment programs, as well as youth employment in general for vulnerable young people. Next slide. So WIOA, as we affectionately call it in Washington, D.C., it was passed with wide bipartisan majority in Congress last summer. Many provisions take effect this July, and that is definitely related to the youth activities provision. It was our first reauthorization of the national workforce programs in 16 years. And so a lot has happened, and WIOA tries to help and catch up what has happened on the ground, so it emphasizes newer and proven strategies in workforce development, and it updates the law for changes in the economy. Next slide. And so from the perspective of class, we believe that WIOA offers opportunities for states, local areas, advocates, providers to think about how they increase the focus on serving the most vulnerable workers, low-income adults and youth, how we can expand education and training opportunities to help young people access good jobs and advance progressively in a career. How do we help unemployed adults and youth earn while they learn? And then it does a lot around planning and accountability policies across their core programs to support more unified approaches. And that goes to something that Michelle talked about around connecting an overall youth employment vision to economic development, to your TANF policy as well. Next slide. In particular, what WIOA does for youth is expand and improve services. It requires that 75% of youth funds to be spent on out-of-school youth. That's out-of-school youth ages 16 to 24, so it expands the age eligibility, who are not enrolled in school and face a number of barriers, including have not finished high school, involved with the justice or adult justice system, foster care or aging out of foster care, homeless and runaway, pregnant or parenting, and youth with disabilities. So it really increases an opportunity to redirect funds. It's not new funds, unfortunately, but to redirect important public funds to serve the most vulnerable. It also requires at least 20% of these youth formula funds to be spent on paid and unpaid work experiences, including summer jobs. And it does a number of things to make it easier to serve youth as it relates to eligibility. Next slide. So a closer look, leveraging WIOA, building on what Keith talked about in the beginning remarks as well as what Michelle spoke about. How can WIOA help to strengthen infrastructure and connections among programs, build a skills focus to summer youth employment, deepen private sector engagement, and help to sustain summer and year-round youth employment programming? So I'm just going to walk through a few levers that I think is very important for this group to hear. Next slide. So one is around the governance. I talked about the convening entity and administrative agent. And so the WIOA does not require a youth council as was the case in the current NWIA law. But it does encourage local workforce areas to maintain and strengthen youth councils as a subcommittee of a local workforce board or establish a youth committee of the local board. You have the option, and we're encouraging folks to do that. And in the proposed regs from the Department of Labor, they also encourage that. And that's key to ensuring that youth employment is not a set-aside issue, but that it's a part of the overall vision and economic development of a local area, of a state, and a community. The next lever is really around the definition of paid and unpaid work experiences. Next slide. So there is a definition in WIOA, in the youth activities formula section of WIOA. And the paid and unpaid work experiences include those that have a component at academic and occupational education. And so that's an opportunity right there to embed that skills focus using these particular dollars and leveraging them with other dollars available through public sources and private sources. So it's summer youth employment opportunities, year-round employment opportunities, pre-apprenticeship programs, internships, job shadowing, on-the-job training, and then occupational skills training. And it includes a priority for training programs that lead to recognized post-secondary credentials that have a labor market value for that particular area. Next slide. One overarching theme throughout WIOA, not just in the youth activities title, is around encouraging career pathways. So the law broadly encourages career pathways for all workers, including young people. And the term career pathway means a combination of rigorous and high-quality education and training and other services. So I'm not going to read through all of these. Slide number 31, please, encouraging career pathways, into all of the characteristics of a career pathways, because you'll have this PowerPoint, on the website of the Federal Reserve. But just wanted to note that everything that we talked about that came from the communities that Michelle mentioned really are embedded in this definition. It's aligned with industry. It includes, again, a range of secondary and post-secondary options. It takes into account individuals' education and career goals, as well as some contextualized work experience. So, again, it's another lever through WIOA to advance skills-based summer youth employment programs as well as youth employment programs overall. Next slide, please. And so from the class perspective, we've been doing lots of work, and you can continue on through pulling all the slides up. We've been doing work with Alliance for Quality Career Pathways, and that's 11 states. And we developed this framework with the states and our local youth practitioners to really demonstrate how a career pathway framework can be a good organizing model for how you want to think about youth, not just youth employment, but employment for your population in your particular region. And so it includes a well-connected and transparent education, training, credentials, and support services. Support services very important as it relates to youth, as we mentioned. Multiple entry points is a key feature for well-prepared students and targeted populations. We know that many young people, especially those who have been not connected to education or workforce and have other obligations such as taking care of their own families and themselves, have to come in and out of a particular education or work intervention. And then it has also multiple exit points. But that even if a young person enters into an entry-level position, whether it's a short-term experience or longer-term experience, they can see that this experience will put them on a future career path. They may be at the first rung, but that's not the only rung. And we, of course, want to be offering young people progressive experiences for them to, move up the career ladder. Next slide. And so, lastly, I just want to call your attention to work-based training, which enables people to earn while they learn. And so there's a couple opportunities that are in Title I of WIOA, not Title I youth, that are also important for this older youth population, 18 to 24. On-the-job training, again, working with employers, the wage reimbursement is now increased to 75%. There are also an option for local areas to implement transitional jobs, which is very important for individuals with barriers to employment who have limited work experience. We have a number of resources on the class website about this. And there's also a number of strategies that WIOA encourages around embedding contextualized learning and integrated education and training into programming. And so the very next two slides, if you want to move forward, have some helpful resources on the class website, and you could definitely visit our website to get these resources. I also want to call attention to another report by Brandeis University, which is the last resource on this document, which is about practical advice guides and smart strategies to employ, educate, and support youth in employability and developmental programs. So I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in this webinar and listen to some of the solutions we found through our work at class. And I'll turn it over to Farah.
Thank you, Keisha, and also Michelle for really teeing up a lot of my presentation. I am the Director of Partnerships for Employment Pathways at the Philadelphia Youth Network, and I will really be talking in my time here, what are the lessons learned from truly being on the ground operating summer employment programming. I'll highlight and pull from a lot of what Keisha and Michelle said in terms of best practices around that coordinator or convener that is operating truly as the backbone to run programming. Also, as the Director for Partnerships for Employment Pathways, I work very closely with the business community, and so I'll be speaking a little bit about how you can engage the business sector in your summer employment programs and what are some strategies that you should be following to do that. So moving to the next slide, just a bit about the Philadelphia Youth Network. We're an intermediary organization that we really connect systems and leverage resources. We work to equip young people for academic achievement, economic opportunity, and personal success. And we do this by really coordinating large-scale cross-sector initiatives and developing the targeted populations that we serve. As we talked about this idea of being a convener, that is truly what Philadelphia Youth Network aims to be, whether it's around strategizing how to get funding on the ground, what populations need to be served. We strive in Philadelphia to be at the center of the conversations about both workforce and education opportunities for the high school age population. We actually serve youth 12 to 24, especially up to 24, now to the new WIOA requirements that Keisha had highlighted. And we really believe that by investing these resources, that Philadelphia's young people need to take their rightful place as members of the world-class workforce in the region. Moving on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the Work Ready system, which is Philadelphia's cross-sector partnership dedicating to improving the economic outcomes of the region's youth. Philadelphia Youth Network is a managing partner of Work Ready Philadelphia. So Work Ready is really a citywide initiative aimed at getting more young people employment opportunities throughout the city, both year-round and summer. Summer is by far our largest program, and we have 4 distinct models under the summer system. We have a career exposure model, which is specifically targeted at middle school students for that first-time career exposure. We then have school or service learning, which is very much community service-based, and students working in groups of 10 to 25 throughout the community, really learning what it's like to show up consistently and get a paycheck. And so that's really targeted at a first-time work experience. Our other model in the summer is called Work Experience, which is also very much focused at a first-time job experience. I often describe the experiences under Work Experience as a typical high school summer job that anybody could probably get. Those rec centers, daycares, summer camps. We work very closely with the Department of Recreation to ensure that their various summer camp coordinators are hired through the Work Ready system. And finally, our last summer model is what we call the internship model. And these are higher level experiences, opportunities that a high school student most likely would not have access to without the support of the Work Ready system. Things like, if you're familiar with the city of Philadelphia, we have opportunities at Comcast, Independence Blue Cross, many of the hospitals. These are really high-class opportunities for predominantly juniors and seniors with some prior work or leadership experience. To really get our programs on the ground, we operate with 50 different provider organizations. Those are those direct service providers on the ground, individually working with students. So 50 different entities that are actually running programming. 1,000 work sites are in our system, and in the last few years, we've served close to 8,000 youth in the summer opportunities. Next slide, please. In doing this work, we've really identified that there are 4 essential players for any type of summer programming in order to make the summer programming work. In no real particular order, they all have to work together, and each one has different components. So first is really the funder. You need funding to run a summer program. Funding can come from the public or private sector, as Keisha was highlighting, WIOA funding from the public sector. There's also state dollars that come down. I know that the Work Ready system heavily relies on TANF youth funding to supplement the summer programming. We also have city dollars that's coming from the public sector. So we're fortunate in Philadelphia to have a large public sector investment, both from city, state, and federal dollars. We then leverage that with private sector funding coming from the business community or the philanthropies, both from corporate sectors as well, similar to JP Morgan Chase. And so we really look to find and blend that funding. You also have to be mindful when thinking about funders of the timeline. So oftentimes funders will think about summer in May and June, and so having those conversations with the funders in your area to ensure that they understand what it takes to run a summer program. Oftentimes you need those dollars coming down in the dead of winter to really do that ramp up, and so making sure that a funder understands that giving money on July 1st is really difficult to get on the ground for a summer program. The funder often also will outline specific outcomes that they are expecting. So your summer model will really have to be reliant and adaptable to various different outcomes based off of that funder. You also need a direct service provider. That is someone on the ground that is directly working in the community and with the young people that is managing the day-to-day experience. When thinking of those direct service providers, thinking about the capacity, how many opportunities or young people are they going to be able to serve in a summer? What is the location or the area? That's then where you need to start thinking about the funder. Does the funder want to support a specific location in the city, and your provider that you may want to work with is not in that area? So how do you make sure that that's working together? Also, many of these direct service providers have current constituents, which is both a good and a bad thing, because sometimes, back to the funding, that you might need to work with a certain population, or the current constituents that the provider is working with doesn't really meet their capacity and scale. So those are all items to consider when thinking about who's actually on the ground working with young people. Moving on to that young person that you're working with, youth is another essential person. You need a young person to fill that summer job. So where are they located throughout the city? How are they going to get to and from work? What are their demographics? What are their successes and challenges in terms of being successful in a summer program? And finally, truly, do they want to work? Just because you have a population of young people that is in the area that the funder wants to work with, how do you ensure that they're truly interested and able to work? And so those are all considerations that need to be taken into account. And finally, I think another really key point is that work site. Who is directly hosting the young person in a summer experience? How many work sites do you have in your system? I think while you're looking at funding and everybody wants to ensure that the most young people are served, you have to also make sure that there's enough places for those young people to go to work. The quality of the work site experience. At Philadelphia Youth Network, through the Work Ready program, we have a monitoring and screening process that is required for all work sites in the system to ensure that it's both a safe and high-quality environment. And once again, location. I mean, is the work site accessible to where the young person is coming from or where they're going? And so all of these key items are extremely, extremely important in any type of summer model, but they're all somewhat siloed. They all have their own different interests and responsibilities and so forth. And so it's really essential to have that coordinating entity to bring them all together. So moving to the next slide, talking about the role of an intermediary or backbone organization. So I wanted to take some time to really highlight the various roles that the intermediary or backbone organization plays, specifically things that we do here in the city of Philadelphia. It basically did it in terms of a circle because there's no real one priority, and things don't really lead into another. It's just truly figuring out all of the different pieces and coordinating it so that when you get to those four key players, they know what to do on the ground. So when it comes to fundraising, this intermediary, in our case, Philadelphia Youth Network, really operates as a single point of entry for funders. So that way, instead of having multiple organizations fighting for similar pots of money that's parsed out, funders can come directly to PYN or the intermediary in your area, and then that funding is then blended and figured out and filtered down to the various providers. That's also where it goes back to Philadelphia Youth Network. We are the ones paying attention to the outcomes. So we're ensuring that based off of what the funders request, that's getting down onto the ground. It really does allow a larger scale to happen in terms of funding because those various funders only really need to work with one person. It also allows, as I mentioned, this blended funding model so that we can truly serve a larger representation of the city by piecing together the various funding requirements. As an intermediary, we also look at the model design. I talked about the 4 different summer summer models we have with Work Ready in our summer program, and they're very much evidence-based best practice. We want to make sure that we are identifying key items that need to be consistent, whether it be start and end date, number of hours that young people are working, key components of a various model. We want to make sure that that's outlined, but then we also want to figure out how to develop a model that's flexible for the various direct service providers that are operating the program to be able to adapt and customize their programs toward their particular constituents that they're working with. So we really play that balance of identifying the model and then, figuring out what those key areas are. We do program oversight, so ensuring that timelines and deadlines are met for the summer system, communicating with our direct service providers, worksites, youth, and funders to make sure that things are moving forward. I think a key point and value with the Philadelphia Youth Network, and if any intermediary has an opportunity how to do this as a best practice, we operate as the employer of record for all young people working through the Work Ready system. So that means that all youth are employees of the Philadelphia Youth Network. There's one online application that everyone fills out regardless of which direct service provider you're working with, so that way students are not completing multiple applications and essentially taking up spots in different programs when they can really only work in one. So there's one application. We're able to track the system at that high level. There's also one enrollment process, so one set of paperwork that a student has to complete because they are all employees of the Philadelphia Youth Network. And finally, we also manage payroll during the summer program. So we operate that payroll process for all students in the summer. This is a huge, huge benefit to both work sites and providers because it takes that additional administration feature off of them. And by taking that on, you really can grow the scale and scope of the summer program that you have. Moving on, we do evaluation and reporting. So we are really looking at how the programs are able to show impact in a very large scale. So being able to tell one Philadelphia story versus multiple smaller programs is very impactful when you're thinking about funding and talking about higher level reports. And so we do that back to funders. We also evaluate if the model is working. So as we mentioned, as a model designer, we look at what the programs are doing on the ground and make any adjustments to those models as needed based off the evaluation. We also have administrative support, so communications, IT, finance, that are here within the intermediary that are offering assistance to the various programs and networks in regards to the Work Ready brand. And finally, another key role is the professional development. So we provide trainings to the direct service practitioners throughout the year around how to build best practices, where are they struggling, what resources do we need. We also do the same for the work sites. How do you ensure that the work sites have all materials available to run high-quality experiences? What is it like to work with a high school student? So we take that role on. The various direct service providers are also very integral in getting professional development out to work sites and youth, but we really do try and offer that service as well. So kind of that really encompasses the various roles of an intermediary, and I think that as you're thinking about scaling up or expanding a summer program, these are things that you need to keep in mind. How do you think about the 4 essential players that we talked about in the last slide, and then who is doing the various functions that I'm talking about in this slide? I'm going to shift gears a little bit and move to the next slide and talk about the business engagement and how you engage the business community. This is a really key point for any summer employment program. From a funding perspective, it's, tapping into the business community as a funder is an extremely important thing to diversify funding and to hopefully get some longer-term partnerships. But also, as Keisha highlighted, there is a requirement within WIOA that there is a strong workforce in placement opportunity. And so thinking about how you get employers on board is really what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. So I've really identified 3 things, high level, that you need to think about when approaching the business community. So first, what is your pitch? You can't just go in saying that, you know, we have a summer program and business needs to be involved because the funder says so. That's not going to be a good sell. So what are the things that you're looking for that you are equipping yourself with knowing before approaching the business community? So in your particular areas, what are the industry needs? Are there growing or booming industries in your community that are going to be in need of jobs or in careers? Is there an aging workforce that's happening that you know that some employers, while they're thinking about it, they don't know how to solve that problem? You need to make sure that you're equipping yourself with that information. Also, what's on the forefront, or what are some of the changes that are happening in various industries that need upskilling or new skilled workers to fill those jobs? So doing that research up front really opens a lot of doors to the business. Also highlighting the community need. So, you know, as both Michelle and Keisha talked about, there is a major youth employment crisis happening right now in our country, and making sure that businesses understand that. It's not, you know, it is a community need, but longer term, it is truly their business need. If young people are not working now, they won't have the skills and experience that businesses are used to expecting when they hire. So making sure that that is really clear, and how you message the kind of national perspective and what the perspective is in the city or the region that you're working in. And finally, thinking about what is the return on investment for the various employers, that, you know, if they are financially supporting, or even if they're only giving their time as a worksite supervisor, what are truly some of the return on investments? And so some of the things that we've really highlighted and has been successful with our partners here in the Philadelphia region, you know, there is great public relations. I mean, the employers that are financially supporting are in all of our reports. We recognize them through op-eds and editorials and so forth. And so having, you know, that community PR relations is definitely an ROI. There's also access to local leaders as we coordinate the various leaders in the area by being part of a larger system or part of a workforce system. You're getting access to different people that some people may be interested in. And then really getting down to the work that's being done, thinking through what work is being done in a summer experience that is being taken off employees' plates, whether it be projects or longer-term things that have not been tackled because of capacity. Another thing that we point out from an ROI is training for staff. You know, use this as a leadership moment for staff who may be supervisors in the next 2 to 3 years, have them supervise a high school intern. That is great learning experience or management training that, you know, you can make an investment and get a win-win. So making sure that you have some of those pitches ready to go before talking to the business community is extremely important. You also need to think through what supports you are offering. As we mentioned, Philadelphia Youth Network, we do the payroll. That is a huge win for a business or a work site that is interested in getting involved in summer programming. The thought of having to take on the HR functions and do the onboard and payroll may be a barrier, and if you're taking that away, it's much easier for someone to think about offering a seat and an experience and that supervisory if they don't have to do the administration. You know, the onboarding goes similar with the payroll. Also, what are you doing with pre-screening and ongoing training? Do you have the capacity to, you know, do some training before young people get there that are related to the job so that young people are not kind of quote-unquote green but have some background in what they might be doing? Are you able to do some assessments with the young people before and send them screened candidates? These are all things that an employer is really going to look for if they're going to jump into this idea of high school youth employment. And finally, who are your partners in the area? Really tapping into your chambers of commerce. They have a vast network of employers, and so sometimes it's almost going to them with the pitch first to say this is why the business community in our region need to be involved so that we can get more young people working. Youth councils, as Keisha mentioned, while under WIOA it is no longer required, many youth councils were created under WIA guidelines, and they are still most likely active, and it's highly recommended even under the WIOA regulations that you keep them. So these are great representatives to tap into to spread the message. Also industry partnerships. So who are the people on the ground that have the access to the business community? If you make 3 to 5 key partnerships there, it may open the doors to exponentially more businesses than you may have been able to get to before. And so when thinking about engaging the business community, really make sure that you have those things in mind. Moving to the final slide, just 2 helpful resources that I want to make sure are shared. First is information, the first is about our various publications through the Philadelphia Youth Network. We release annual reports every year, both of the work the Philadelphia Youth Network is doing, the work of Work Ready, of Project U-Turn, and our various initiatives. So if you want to learn more about backbone, coordination, summer employment, those reports are very, very helpful. The second bullet is a report done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and it's Making Youth Employment Work. And it's very business focused, but it really does have a high-level overview of what are some of the ways that you can really get youth employment programs to work in your area. And so moving forward to wrap up my thing, thank you for all of your time. I think that I hope that you learned a lot from our 3 presenters. I know we have some time for questions, so I'll turn that over to our coordinators to field some of those.
All right, thank you, Farah. It's Jean back again. Wanted to start our Q&A portion, but just a quick reminder to our participants, you can submit your question to our presenters by clicking the Ask Question button on the webinar tool. So our first question is, we are an 8-week program offering a paid intern job for high school students. What is the requirement of building the partner relationship with SYEP?
Can you repeat the question, please? I didn't hear the last part of it, about the requirement.
Sure, no problem. I'll start from the beginning. We are an 8-week program offering a paid intern job for high school students. What is the requirement of building the partner relationship with SYEP? And I'm sorry, it's just an acronym. They haven't defined SYEP. I was hoping that the presenters knew what that meant.
Yeah, sure. So I'll take a stab at it, and I'm sure Keisha and Farah can jump in. So yes, SYEP is Summer Youth Employment Program. I'm not sure what type of organization it is that's sponsoring this or what city it's in. I mean, in some cities, it's the mayor's office that kind of coordinates a collaborative effort around Summer Youth Employment Program. In other cities, as Farah talked about, there's this sort of key intermediary who's working with lots of other nonprofits or other organizations who are actually doing, sort of providing the services and placing the young people. So I think the short answer is it depends on where you are, and sort of what model is in place in your city. But I would certainly, ask my fellow panelists to speak from their experience as well.
Michelle, it's Jean in St. Louis, and if I could just mention, part of the individual did identify that this person is a coordinator of West Gold Fellows, if that helps.
I'll jump in. This is Farah Farnese. I'm not sure if the question was actually referring to how to get partnered with J.P. Morgan Chase's funding under their summer youth employment models, but I think just reiterating what Michelle had said, that you really do need to look at the various funders that are happening in the city, whether there is an intermediary. I mean, through Philadelphia Youth Network, we release formal RFPs and do a bidding process to get our various providers connected to the system. And so that's kind of the way that it happens in the Philadelphia area, that by being that central intermediary, we then subcontract down to the various provider organizations for the programs, and so that's how they access funding in our region. And I would say that it probably, if there is a strong intermediary in any of your areas, it would probably be a similar model.
All right, thank you. Our next question: can you define transitional jobs?
Hi. Yes, this is Keisha, and I will take the transitional jobs question. And so, and I will encourage you also to reach out to the National Transitional Jobs Network, as well as to visit the class website. We did a PowerPoint presentation and webinar on this. But transitional jobs are time-limited work experiences that are for subsidized employment for individuals with various employment who are chronically unemployed or have an inconsistent work history. Transitional jobs are usually funded in large by TANF, but also now with the new changes in WIOA, it can be funded locally. It has been used as a strategy for youth. There's several programs that are really focused on homeless and runaway young people, as well as young people who may have had issues with substance abuse and addiction.
Okay, thank you, Keisha. Our next question, what are some best practices for engaging parents in the process?
I can jump in on that. I think that best practices that we've seen in engaging parents is communication as early as possible. I think that goes back to this whole idea of the timing and the timeline of summer programs, that you really do have to start as early as possible. So tapping into those direct service providers, those providers may be schools, the community-based organizations, and so forth. And so it really is ensuring that that is a component that is happening. It may be hosting kind of information sessions for parents, ensuring that you have clear and concise documents and resources available on their websites. We have a youth hotline that is manned, by one staff person every day, all day long, from April through August, that is fielding these type of questions. So making sure that you have that set up is a really key factor. And I mean, I just think a best practice, the high-level thing that I could say is the earlier that you start, the better. And also thinking about when the parents are going to be able to participate in programs. So evenings and weekends are going to be more accessible for parents than if you're trying to do something in the middle of the day.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, how will the new WIOA emphasis on prioritizing funding towards out-of-school youth impact summer youth programs going forward?
I'll take that question. This is Keisha from class. So a couple of points is that lots of local areas were not necessarily using their funding from WIA to support summer youth employment. It did leverage some funding for summer youth employment for some local areas, but by and large, summer youth employment is funded by a mix of public and private resources, state and local, as Farah mentioned and Michelle mentioned. And so one of the opportunities you have through WIOA is that you are required to use 20% of the youth formula funds on work experiences, paid and unpaid. And so it all depends on how the local area will, and your city, will implement that 20% expenditure requirement. But it also, but in that definition of work experience, it is explicit that it includes summer youth employment.
All right, thank you. Our next question. Besides offering academic credit and money to working students, are there other best practices for incentivizing students and parents?
I'll take a stab at that. So one of the things that we have done is leverage our employees around financial literacy and financial capability workshops. So in addition to sort of learning in the workplace in specific functions, youth are also gaining these, youth and their parents have an opportunity to sort of gain these best practices around savings and setting goals. One of the other things that we did last summer was we ran a series of coding sessions for the young people, very interactive, very engaging, and we did that in a couple of our markets. So thinking about other ways to sort of engage young people outside of work. It's a short period of time, and it, the focus is on skills-based opportunities, but to sort of think of other ways that really keeps them engaged and connects to the education that they're going back to.
Okay, thank you. This question relates to that. So, sorry, did I hear another presenter wanting to chime in? Okay, I just heard a little background noise. But so this next question actually relates to that one, so I'll announce it. Given that many youth may be receiving a paycheck for the first time, do any of the programs discussed include a focus on youth saving or any other financial capability education through summer youth programs and or beyond?
I can jump in on this first, and I know, as Michelle just alluded to, I think financial literacy is a key component of any summer youth program, so you definitely should think about how to incorporate that. Through the Work Ready system, we do ask that it's down at the provider level, those that are doing a direct service, but we do our best to provide resources as an intermediary. If struggling or interested in who to tap into, many of the banks in the various areas are required to have some community presence and community education, so there's often resources that they're really interested in giving out or partnering with to get down to the ground. So if there's not already an established partnership, tapping into some of those financial institutions, many of them have programs and curriculums that they, I'm sure, would be willing to partner and do. So I would say that high level, I think any summer employment, especially dealing with youth, should have some type of financial literacy component, and that probably looks very different. If there's a national, I will also say the U.S. Conference of Mayors has a dollar-wise program, so if you are not tapped into any local areas, if you look up U.S. Conference of Mayors and dollar-wise, it's an online resource, various portals that young people can go through. It's targeted for high school youth employment, and they also give out great prizes, such as iPads and laptops and so forth. So, if you don't have something already set up and there's not a partner kind of on the ground, that is a great online resource that I would definitely recommend.
That's great, Sarah. I would also note that MoneyThink is another organization that's got great resources on its website. They've actually got an app that young people can download, and it again is sort of an engaging way to teach financial education.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, are there any particular cities or regions that are of interest with J.P. Morgan or WIOA?
So I'll take the J.P. Morgan Chase question. Yes, we are probably funding in the same cities this year. I can't speak to our 2015 grants because not all are final yet, but they're all in process, just sort of going back to what I said earlier about the timing. Key markets for us include New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Oakland, Dallas, Milwaukee. So all, the sites the cities in which I listed or were shown on the list on the deck are areas that we think have really strong youth programming organizations. I can't really speak to, again, 2015 funding. I would recommend that anyone who's sort of interested in funding for next year, sort of now is the time to start planning. Most of our funding is done through our local markets. So if you log on to our website and you can go to that same Skills at Work link, you can sort of find the application for funding. I'm also happy to receive emails.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And Keisha, I'm not sure if you wanted to add to on the WIOA side.
Well, it's a federal law, and so how it works is that the Department of Labor, and as in case with the adult education funds and voc rehab passes monies down through the state. and then it is distributed to regional or local areas. And so pretty much every community is within a local area or is contained within a local area. And I encourage you then to visit the Department of Labor website to identify your appropriate local area, as states and locals are in the planning stages of implementing the law.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have asked all the questions that have come in at this time, but I'm going to give Keith an opportunity to give me some closing remarks before we end our session today. So if you have a question that you want to get in before the end of the call, you can still submit or click that Ask Question button and submit your question. Keith, do you have any closing remarks for today? Keith, if you are speaking, you may be on mute, so I'll give you a chance to unmute and then give us some closing remarks for the day.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jean. I want to thank our listeners and our speakers and Jean. And our listeners can send, you have our email addresses, and you can contact us, and we'll be glad to try to respond and answer your questions. I also want to mention that we have another webinar scheduled for this Thursday at 1 o'clock, which is focused on how chambers of commerce can help area businesses on workforce development programs for high school students. And there you'll hear a national perspective as well as initiatives from a statewide chamber of commerce and 2 local chambers. So I want to thank you all, and we will follow up with you once the recording is posted on our website.
All right. Thank you so much, Keith. And I do want to echo that. I'd like to thank our presenters today for spending the time to present the content to you. And I also pushed out a survey. You may have noticed the link. Please do give us your feedback. It'll just take a moment, and we would definitely love to know how we did today. So this does conclude our webinar. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.